Hello, friends. Welcome. My name is David Hart. I'm the Director of PSR Security Program. We're very glad you joined us for this important webinar on effective lobbying. We're still gathering, but we're going to start now. We've got a good group gathered, including many people we know from the community, as well as PSR leaders from around the nation. I'm going to just give us a brief introduction to PSR, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and then hand off this to Rebecca Griffin, the Political Director of Peace Action West, who's going to handle the core of this webinar. There are a few questions and comments that have come in ahead of time. We're going to try to respond to them later. And because some of you were concerned about 501c3 and C4 tax status issues, we will be trying to address them. But the bulk of the webinar is how, when you know you can go out there and lobby, that you do it well. So I want to introduce Physicians for Social Responsibility. It's a wonderful organization that was founded 50 years ago. And you'll see here a picture of the signing of the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. That's up because one of the first things that PSR was involved with back then was the dangers of atmospheric nuclear testing. Strontium-90, a radioactive element, was being found in mother's milk and baby's teeth, and it helped spark a lot of concern that led to a limited nuclear test ban treaty, unfortunately only pushing the testing underground, and as we say, it had a big enough loophole to drive an arms race through, and since then had a vast increase in the number of nuclear weapons. But this is an organization that is guided by values and expertise of medicine, and we try to address the gravest threats to health and survival. Founded 50 years ago with the tagline, I enjoy preventing what we cannot cure. There's much more I could tell you about the organization. I'll give you a couple highlights as we go forward, but do want to get to the core topic tonight. We're very proud that the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War grew out of PSR, and together with them we won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1985. Since then, PSR, which started around the nuclear weapons issues, which is my great focus, has been expanding to include other grave threats to human health and survival. So we have a program on environment and health, which deals with climate change and toxics. A lot of you are active with that program. We hope you would use these skills to lobby on those important issues. And our safe energy program working against nuclear reactors. Tonight, we are really lucky to have one of the great activist organizers in our country leading the core of this webinar. Rebecca is a political director of Peace Action West. She tracks the pulse of Capitol Hill and the perspective of regular Americans on America's top foreign policy challenges. Travels extensively through the western states and often comes visits us here in DC, organizes communities and brings their message to the policymakers. She has directed a variety of campaigns urging a shift to non-military strategy in Afghanistan, ending the war in Iraq, funding and reforming civilian engagements through diplomacy and development, and shift to a more balanced security budget through cutting wasteful military spending. She's really a great leader. I've enjoyed knowing and working with her, and I'm so thrilled that she's able to be with us. I hope all of you will enjoy learning from and with Rebecca today. I want to mention to you that we're going to have several question and answer periods. We welcome your active participation during the question and answer periods. We start this webinar because echo can come if too many voices are unmuted at one time, with all of you in a mute mode. But we're going to have, at several points along the way, question and answer periods. I want you to note that this webinar is being recorded, so you should be aware of that if you're going to participate. We very much hope you will. There is a process that we're going to try for this, and my great friend and colleague Ashish Sinha will be facilitating the questions. So I think most of you would see on the right side of your screen, it can be moved, but it pops up there initially, a GoToWebinar control panel. Along with it is a chat box where you can speak to organizers and panelists or to the whole audience, and questions that you can ask. I think there are a lot of important pieces here, and we welcome your active participation through that method. Ashish will be gathering questions and calling on you. I don't see it on my screen because I'm in a presenter mode, but as I understand it, attendees should be seeing a Uh, on that control panel, often on your right-hand side of your screen, on the top left of that control panel, a little icon that looks like a hand. And you can raise your hand virtually to ask a question. So we want you to be aware that the webinar is being recorded, that there will be question and answer periods throughout, and that as we move through, we'd like to leave big discussions for the final question and answer period, making sure that we get to all the content we want to hit tonight. But first, we'll have these question and answer periods where people can ask some clarifying questions. Rebecca, we don't want to run through the whole thing without giving you a chance to check in, see if there's anything that was unclear. So that's it for now. I'll be coming back later to talk some more about the 501c3 and C4 issues. If we can, we'd like to transfer the screen control to Rebecca. I'm looking at the screen sharing. Change presenter. Rebecca Griffin, organizer. I say okay. And I think by the magic of that, you should be able to, when she tells us she's available, you'll be able to see Rebecca's screen. Rebecca?
Yes. Can you see the first slide there?
I do.
Okay. We'll get started. So thank you all so much for having me on the call, and thanks to David and Ashish and everyone at PSR. I'm very glad to be here, and hope this will be helpful for you. And normally when I do a training like this, I'll be doing it in person and have role plays and try to make it as interactive as possible. So I'll try to find as many ways to incorporate that as I can, and please do, just to reiterate, please do ask questions and participate at any time, so we can make sure this is the most useful for you. And along those lines of being interactive, I'm going to do a couple of polls that should pop up for you. And I'm going to start the first one right now. So hopefully you should see that, and just go ahead and answer that poll when we get started, and that will help me get a little bit of a read on who's here. So to start off, the first thing I want you to understand is you are not normal. And I mean this in the most complimentary way possible. This is something that I think I've really come to understand in my years as an organizer, is there's a very small portion of people who are as motivated and dedicated to not just point and click and send an email or read the news about an issue or even go to an event, but to really learn how to influence members of Congress, to sit down with them, to sit down with their staff. It's a very, very tiny portion of the population. And you are one of those few people. And what that means, of course, is that you are influential, because you are speaking for a lot more people than just whoever is in your meeting. You are the ones whose voices are going to be heard most directly by members of Congress. And they know that as someone who takes the time and has the dedication to come to their office, that you are someone who is likely to be influential in your community and to be talking to a lot of people about these issues. So what you have to say in those meetings is going to be very important. And one thing that I wanted to share is, and if this is a little hard for you to see, I apologize, but I'll explain what it is. So the Congressional Management Foundation is an organization that does work on facilitating good communication between Congress and the public. And they did a survey not too long ago where they asked congressional staff, if your boss has not made up his or her mind about an issue, how influential are these different advocacy tactics in influencing the decision? And one of the things that you see at the very top, the most influential, is in-person issue visits from constituents. So you see 60% of people said it has a lot of influence, 39% more said it has some influence, so basically all but 1% said that was an influential tactic. And you can see down, when you go on down the line, people feel they're less and less influential. And that doesn't mean that all those other tactics aren't important. We do them at Peace Action West. I'm sure you do a lot of them. But it does mean, in terms of the most high impact activity that you can do in-person meetings with your member of Congress or that person's staff are way, way up there in terms of how influential. So this is a really important skill because it really takes effort. It demonstrates a high level of commitment to the cause that you have. So it's great that you all are here to learn this, and hopefully, again, you'll feel confident to go in and do this. So I see that from looking at what's coming from the poll, that the majority of you have done some lobbying, so that's great. And a lot of you have done it both locally and DC, so we've got a good experienced group here. That's good for me to know in terms of gearing this. And I'm going to, here we go. Okay, so now you can see how that played out with everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 things that are important steps to having a successful meeting. And while I do that, I'm just going to put up one more poll just to get a little sense of what you all are most interested in learning about today. So in terms of your roadmap for a successful lobby meeting, a lot of this will sound very obvious, but it's important. Be prepared. So we're going to spend a lot of time on all the work that goes in before you have the meeting, and a lot of that is, even more important than what happens in the room to some degree. Next is maximizing your meeting. So we'll spend some time on, that however long you have, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour with your member of Congress or the staff person, how to get the most out of that. And then keep in touch. So talking about what happens after the lobby meeting, because this is really an ongoing process. It's not just about, what happens in that meeting and that's the end of the story. In order to be effective, it's really an ongoing experience. So on that, we're going to jump right in to the first one. Okay. And it looks like most people have voted here. So here we go. So a good range of things that people are interested in. It looks like a good chunk of you are interested in this first thing that we're going to talk about, which is being prepared. So be prepared is known as the Boy Scout motto, but I, for one, am not too happy with the Boy Scouts right now, so we're going with the Girl Scouts. And this is actually a picture of them with a member of Congress. So in terms of preparation, the first thing we're going to talk about is building your A-team, which a number of you put down as something that you're interested in hearing about. I have to confess that I've never actually watched the A-Team, but I presume that they are very good at accomplishing whatever they accomplished on that TV show. So you are going to put together your A-Team as well for your lobbying. Now, in terms of putting together a team, and you may have different options depending on whether you're doing the meeting in Washington, D.C., if you're flying people out, or if you're doing it in your own district. But generally speaking, it's better not to have more than 4 or 5 people who are actually going to speak during the meeting, because you'll want to find out how much time you have ahead of time, but generally that's usually more than enough. You can always have other people who are there that just want to be there and be counted, but not necessarily have as much of a speaking role. You can have other people, if there are other people that want to come and you can't fit them in, you can have them send handwritten letters or other messages so their voices are heard in the meeting as well. And I'm not going to get into any of the logistics of setting up meetings. It sounds like most of you will probably know that since you have some lobbying experience, but if you have questions about any of that, feel free to ask. So in terms of the people to bring with you, again, this is obvious, but not always obvious enough from different attempts at this I've seen. So number 1 is you want the people in the meeting to be constituents. And if that's the only thing about them that's special, according to this list that I'm giving you, that's totally fine. Again, as that chart showed, it's the meeting with constituents, with people who have influence, with people who can vote for them or not vote for them in the election. That's the most important thing. But if you want to get more advanced, if you want to think even more strategically about how to influence the person, then you can go beyond that. But you don't want to bring someone who is not a constituent and doesn't have any kind of link to the district, because not only are they not as concerned with what the person says, but it also portrays that you're not quite as savvy in understanding the process and what they're likely to listen to. And in terms of within that broad group of constituents, who are the people you want to think about? One is, who does this member listen to? And there are various ways that you might know that this. For instance, I'm out in the Bay Area in California, and we've been looking at someone like Nancy Pelosi and wanting to influence her, who does she listen to? And, we talk to people like the Episcopal bishop in San Francisco, because when Nancy Pelosi did a press conference announcing her healthcare victory, she called him and asked him to appear at that press conference. So that's someone who has a personal relationship, someone that member of Congress is really interested in listening to. But it could be some other kind of group. If it's a group that member of Congress has attended their events in the past, anything like that can be really helpful in terms of upping the influence that you're going to have. People impacted by the issue, of course, can be really important. So if you're talking about some sort of issue having to do with the war, you could have people who have served in the military or military families. With a lot of the nuclear issues we've talked about, you have a lot of work, for instance, in places like Utah. I think we have at least one Utah person on here. And the downwinders who've been very personally affected by nuclear testing. So anyone who can speak from personal experience and have a really memorable story that's likely to get their attention, then that's great as well. You can bring experts, and this is a case where, it might be okay if this person is not from the district. If you just have someone who has some sort of expertise on an issue that you're working on, then bringing that person in might help in terms of, getting the argument across from someone they consider credible. It's the kind of people that we tend to call validators when we're looking at, doing media work or different things, that we want to have people who are, have some sort of expertise on the issue and are likely to be taken very seriously by the member of Congress or by their staff. Somebody who has a personal connection with the member. So again, it could be not even having to do with your issue, but do you know someone who went to high school with this member of Congress or has some sort of link with them? Or their kids go to the same school or whatever it is. Those things are things that people do remember and that get their attention. So that can be helpful as well. Thinking about key constituencies within the district. So you might know that, for instance, there are really active labor unions in the district, and that the labor community really turns out voters on election day and is really influential on that member of Congress. Or, that you have a district where that's predominantly Catholic, and the Catholic Church has a lot of influence. Anything like that where they're linked to a community that is very important to that member of Congress. If you can find someone from one of those groups who will come in and speak about your issue as well, then that can help, again, in terms of just getting their attention. I did a district meeting in Montana recently with a staffer, and one of the people in our meeting pointed out that, she was just sort of listening, not really paying that much attention, or just, being nice and talking with us. And then when the people that I was with said, "Oh, I work for the Montana Association of Churches, and the other person said, and I'm a pastor at this Methodist church," suddenly she got out her notebook and was taking notes and knew that, okay, this is important. These are people I want to listen to. Another thing you can do is a representative of a group in the district. So this is another case where it can potentially be okay if the person is not a constituent. And this is what I do a lot of times as a person who works at Peace Action West. I'll do meetings where I don't necessarily live in the district, but we have supporters in the district. So I can go in and speak on behalf of those supporters. And so again, that might be a little more rare, but if there's someone that doesn't live in the district but is in the leadership of some kind of group that is in the district, then you can do that. And basically, if again, you can have people find other ways to get their message in if they can't come, or if there isn't enough room. So what I want to do now is just look a little bit at sort of an exercise and thinking about how you might plan something like this. So some of you might recognize this person. I'm betraying some of my pop culture preferences in this PowerPoint presentation. So this is our hypothetical example that Representative Walter White is somebody that we're going to set up a meeting with in the district. And so what we know about him, having nothing to do with the issues, is that before he was a member of Congress, his jobs included being a high school chemistry teacher and being a small business owner. And there's a large state university in his district, and it is a majority Latino district. So what are some examples of people or groups that we might try to get in a meeting like that? And maybe you can just raise your hand if you have an idea, and Ashish can call on you.
Hi, this is Ashish. We have one suggestion from Matthias, so I'm just going to unmute for a moment. Matthias?
Yes? I said students.
Mm-hmm.
Due to the fact that there's a large state university and also that he used to be a teacher.
Right. Yeah. Definitely key constituency in the area. One that's likely to be influential. You know, student vote's probably really important to him. Other ideas?
This is David. I'll just say for those who haven't yet met him, that's Matthias Hart, our great student organizer at PSR.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple others. Mike Carberry, I'm just going to unmute you for a moment.
I said teachers union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great one, both because, you know, he was likely a member of the teachers union at one point. They're also probably, again, an influential group in the district.
We have one more suggestion from, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Pune Saberi.
Yep, that's right.
And your suggestion was? I think it might have been union members as well, sort of as an overall category.
Mm-hmm. Great. So yeah, those are all really great ideas. You know, teachers, people from the teachers union. You know, if he's a small business owner, you could think about somebody who might relate on that level, either another small business owner, you know, someone from the Chamber of Commerce or something like that, which can be a tough get sometimes, but they've definitely been involved on some issues like Iran sanctions, for instance. You know, you hit on the state university and the students, you know, professors, people from student groups. You know, obviously, if it's a majority Latino district, then people from Latino civic groups could be really key. Again, groups that are active in elections, because obviously this is all connected to, you know, these people wanting to keep their jobs, right? And as much as we want them to act purely on, you know, the moral righteousness of our position, you know, we know that they're going to be paying attention to a lot of different factors. So anyone that can contribute to this idea that, you know, this is a winning issue for you in the district, that's going to help. So before we move on to the next phase of preparation, does anyone have any questions at this point?
Thanks, Rebecca. If you have any questions, just to remind you, you can either chat them in through the questions window, or you can raise your hand, and I'll unmute you for you to be able to answer the question. There were two more just from the exercise. Bill, Tammy, Andy suggested Latino, either science teacher or church leaders. It might be useful to bring to the meeting for that exercise.
Great.
Any questions from anyone about some of the material that was presented? There'll be other opportunities later on as well. We do have one. Barbara, I'm going to unmute you and just, oh, actually, doesn't have audio. So Barbara's question was, wouldn't it matter what you're lobbying for?
Certainly it would. In an example, that I was thinking of from a meeting that I've done in the district was, for instance, we were doing a district meeting in Los Angeles around Iran and not going to war with Iran and sanctions, and so we had a couple of Iranian Americans with us, and we also had a local rabbi with us because there is a perception about where the Jewish community is on that issue, and we wanted to give an alternative perspective. So that can definitely impact what you're doing as well. And of course, with the example that we just gave, you have to make sure, can you find a teachers union who is willing to take a position on nuclear weapons or whatever it is. So that's definitely a factor as well, and that goes to the people impacted by the issue. But where you can find the overlap of the issue and what the representative cares about, that can be a really good team to pull together based on that intersection. Anything else before we move on?
Andy, did you also have a comment?
Yes, I just meant that we actually have this lobby day idea where we invite people to come to Washington to lobby, and therefore we don't always have a sort of or advanced idea of sort of who's going to be there. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this sort of membership opportunistic type lobbying and how to make the most of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, that's great too, and like I said, the most important thing is that they're constituents. So as long as you're sending people to meetings where they're meeting with their representative or senator, or they can claim some sort of connection to the district that's relevant, then that's great. And I think the biggest part, when you do have a group like that, where it's more of just putting out a general call, which we've definitely done as well, then it comes down to the preparation part, and that's really key, and that's actually what I'm going to transition into if we're good on questions for right now. So a big part of the preparation is just knowing the representative, because this is a very, very targeted approach that you're taking by having a meeting as opposed to some sort of general grassroots push that you're doing. So think about, what is the person's background? That's a little bit of what we got into in that example. And who are the people that influences that person? And most of that information is pretty easy to find. If you look on their websites, you can see their bio, you can see, what kind of events in the community they've been going to. You can find out who their campaign donors are online. So, there's a lot that you can find that's just out there publicly that can help inform that. Again, know the district, and we already talked a little bit about that in terms of, who are the people there, what's the district like, and hopefully if you're from there, you would know this. And but thinking a little bit about what the district says, how the district is impacted by whatever issue that you're talking about. Obviously, you want to know this person's stance on your issue. Sometimes that can be challenging on some of the issues that we work on, because if a person, say, isn't on a certain committee or something like that, you might not know how that person feels about the New START treaty or the nuclear weapons budget or something like that. But you want to look as much as you can to see if they've put out any sort of statements on the issue. Their positions on that. Look at their voting record. And again, this is something that you can find in various places. There are websites where you can look and just get very general information about the votes that have happened and bills that are out there. But there are also a lot of groups that will curate lists of votes and that sort of thing. Peace Action West is one of them. Where we keep things on our website about votes that have happened, where people are on the issues. We put out a voting record every year. I'm sure there are other groups that are tracking this kind of stuff as well. So if they've already taken certain votes, that's going to give you a lot of information about what that person is likely to do and not to do. Same thing with bill co-sponsorships. And this thing is, those are obviously a little bit more proactive, because if it's a vote, everybody has to take a stance at some point, assuming that they're there. But the co-sponsorships usually show an extra level of being proactive and getting on the record in support of something. So that's another good thing to look at if you know of any bills on your issue from the last couple of years. What has this person done on those? So make sure that you figure all that out, because that's going to, number one, it's going to give you credibility when you go in there, that you can demonstrate that you understand the process, you understand their record. And I've had this experience before of talking to staffers in DC. You're like, wow, you're not like other peace groups, which is not a very nice hit on other peace groups, and I wouldn't agree with it. But they're like, oh, you really understand what's going on. Like that gets their attention. They're impressed by that. It shows that, again, you're someone worth listening to, that you understand the process and how to ask for things. And, it can also give you some insights into kind of questions that you might ask. For instance, the last time I was up on Capitol Hill in June, there had been a letter to the president about Iran that was not very helpful. And that a lot of both Republicans and Democrats had signed, and knowing before we went into meetings with some of those staffers that they had signed the letter, that gave us an idea of where they were going, and also knowing that ahead of time, we could go in there and ask about what was your motivation in signing this, what do you think it would accomplish? It gives you sort of a jumping off point there. And it will inform what you're going to ask for, which we're going to spend a lot more time on later on. But that's going to be really key, having that baseline, knowing what the person has already done. So once hopefully you've done all this research ahead of time, and then you want to make sure that your group is having a pre-meeting so that you're figuring out how the meeting is going to go once you actually get in there. So, even if it's just an hour before the actual meeting with the member of Congress or the staffer happens, it's just a way to make sure everyone's on the same page, and to make sure that you have a clear idea of what you want to get out of the meeting as a group. So some of the things that you want to go over in that pre-meeting. What are the main points that you want to get across? I'm sure that everyone on here has a lot to say about what, all the different issues that we work on, and could easily go in there and talk about them for a long time. But you're going to have a limited amount of time. And you really want to think about what are the most important points that we need to get out in this limited time that we have. And you want to base that, of course, on what you think are going to be the arguments that are going to be influential to that particular person, which would be informed by your research. You want to think about, what is most relevant to whatever it is you're going to ask them to do, because sometimes it might be making the case that whatever action you're going to ask them to take is really important and is going to make a difference in moving this agenda forward. So, think about what are the key things and have those points in mind before you go into the meeting. Also thinking about questions. I think that a lot of people, myself included, when I first started lobbying, go in thinking, all right, I'm going to go in there, I'm just going to lay out my rap, I'm going to tell them, what I think about this issue and what they should do, and that's how the meeting goes. And sometimes they're like that, and that's fine. But, it's really an important opportunity for you to get information as well as to give information. And this will vary a lot depending on who you're meeting with. If you're meeting with a staffer in a local congressional office, they might not have a lot to say. They might not know the issues that you're in there talking to them about. In my experience, it really varies. Some people are comfortable speaking on behalf of their boss, some of them are not. But if you're meeting with a DC staffer who has a very specific issue portfolio, or with a member of Congress, then, that person's obviously going to know a lot. And so you might think about, what are some questions I could ask that are going to give me information that's going to help me later? And that could be things about, why did this person, voted this way or that on a particular issue, or why a person hasn't done more on an issue. It could be about process, when is this bill going to come to the floor? Are there going to be amendments allowed? It could be just intelligence that would help you inform your advocacy strategy going forward. So, it can be good to think about that ahead of time. What are the things that we would like to know from this person, and have that planned out ahead, what kind of questions that you want to ask. And then think about assignments and agenda. So depending on how experienced your group is, how well you all know each other, you can play it by ear to some degree. But especially for new people, if you have people in there who haven't been in lobby meetings before, then it helps to really lay it out. Say, okay, this person's going to talk about this program and the nuclear weapons budget, then this person's going to talk about this one and why we don't need it, and then this third person is going to ask about the member's opinion on it, and then the last person's going to make the ask to co-sponsor a bill. So just have that laid out in the order. That way when you get in there, it'll make people a little bit more comfortable. They know what they're supposed to cover and when. And then, you can obviously play it by ear and make it conversational, ideally. But you have that, again, that baseline so that everybody knows what needs to get out there in the course of the meeting, because you don't necessarily have a lot of time. Who's going to take notes? Notes are really important, especially in the idea of making this an ongoing process and a relationship that you're building, and that it's not just this one meeting. So you want to make sure that someone is assigned to take notes, so you remember what happened in the meeting and can use that later. Oftentimes it can be helpful to have everyone practice if they're new, so that they feel comfortable saying whatever they're going to say. And if they, you can give them feedback if they're new, just to make sure that they're prepared for that. Think about materials you might want to bring. Oftentimes, we'll go into a meeting and hand over some sort of packet that has information like, oh, here's an op-ed that ran in the district about this issue, or here's a really good article by an expert that reinforces the position or that addresses some concern we know this member of Congress has. So you want to spend some time ahead of time thinking about what are the materials that you want to have as part of your lobbying information, and that will back up your position and who's going to bring them. And then most importantly, in a lot of ways, you want to have your ask. So what is it that you're going to ask this member of Congress to do. That's going to be the ultimate purpose of your meeting. And the next thing that we're going to do is spend some time on just the asks. But does anyone have any questions on just preparation before we get to that?
We have one question from Mike.
Yeah, it's not really a question. I just wanted to tell people not to leave their materials till after the meeting is over. Because what happens is that staffer will read your materials instead of listen to you.
Yes, that's a very good point. I never hand anything over until the end of the meeting so that they have to pay attention to you. Anything else?
Any other questions? We had one question just from the last one from Tammy about, do you think it's better to visit in district or, sorry, one moment. Is it better to visit in district or in DC to show grassroots concern on an issue?
Well, I think there are advantages to really both approaches. I think that, again, with the DC people, you have the advantage of that they'll have much more in-depth knowledge of the issues that you want to talk about. And can probably tell you a lot more about that person's position on the issues than if you're meeting with somebody in the district. And again, it varies by the member of Congress, but generally speaking, you're going to get a lot more out of that. But on the other hand, if you're doing a local meeting, it is a lot easier to put together that A team of lobbyists because it's right in their own backyard. It's easy to get over there as opposed to getting a lot of people out to DC. So I think both are really important. And I think either one is effective. One option that I know some people have done is having a policy staffer from DC call into a district meeting. So that could be one way to get the best of both worlds. So you get that person on there who has the direct pulse on what's going on, but you don't have to travel all the way to DC. And one other thing that that we tried earlier this year. The Peace Action West oversees and staffs the campaign for a nuclear weapons-free world, which I know some of the people on the call are a part of. And we did some virtual lobby meetings where we had people on conference calls with DC staff. That's another option too if you can't get out to DC. So I think they're all really effective. It's a matter of, you know, what your resources are and the time is, and there are ways that you can maximize any one of them to get your point across. Moving on then to the ask, which is again the really important part of the meeting. So one thing that I know you've all heard before that's really important is just you can't get what you don't ask for. Again, seems pretty obvious, but I think there is an inclination sometimes to want to go into a meeting and I'm just going to tell all these people, you know, why nuclear weapons are so horrible and why we shouldn't have them anymore, and how much we hate nuclear weapons and think that they should do something about it. And that's all well and good, but if you just go in there and just state your opinion about something, that certainly has an impact. I know that issue is important to you, but it's harder to measure what you actually got out of the meeting because you didn't ask them for a specific thing that you can then follow up on. You know, you're not going to say, oh, well, we didn't get rid of nuclear weapons, so that lobby meeting wasn't useful. That you have, you know, something that you can use as a standard of measurement, of success, and a way to hold that person accountable to what you're asking them to do. So in terms of coming up with your ask, the clearest ask is usually, you know, if there's a vote coming up or if there's a bill that you want someone to co-sponsor. Obviously, that's a very concrete thing that you can do, easy thing to measure. And also, you know, with these kind of things, you're offering them a solution. Again, right? You're not just telling them what the problem is, but you're giving them something that you can do to say, you know, this will help with this issue. You know, we will support you in this. You will have our praise for this if you take this action. It's really concrete. If, for instance, there isn't a bill or a vote on the issue, or the person that you're talking to has already done those things, then you can think about, you know, more proactive activities like giving a speech or writing an op-ed or introducing a bill or asking a question at a hearing. You know, there are a lot of creative ways that you can think about it that are not just vote this way, don't vote that way, because unfortunately we don't always get votes on these issues as an easy way to move it forward. You know, and sometimes there are other opportunities that come up in terms of person being on a committee, in terms of, you know, like a Dear Colleague letter that someone circulates that they can sign. So there are a lot of different options, but before you think about what you want to ask, there are some things that you want to consider. So one is, what has this person already done? So if you know that they've already taken some action, obviously you don't want to walk in there not knowing that and say, oh, will you co-sponsor the SANE Act to cut the nuclear weapons budget? And they're like, oh, we already did that, and then you're left without something for them to do. And it's also showing that you don't necessarily know about that member or about the issue. So you want to think about that, and thank them if they've done something good, because the positive reinforcement is really important. We don't always want to just be telling them what they should do, but we want to show them that we do notice when they do something positive, and that there is a reward in doing that in terms of support from the community. So then you want to think about, what are they most likely to do? So you want to base it on their track record, and that's where the research comes in. It's really important. You want to base it on what you know about what this person is likely to actually do. And sometimes that means you have to work incrementally, and that you're not going to get, you know, the big ask that you necessarily want from this person, or, you know, the perfect thing on your issue. But if you go in there just asking for this pie in the sky thing and then you don't get it, it can be frustrating and it's harder to move the relationship forward. Whereas if you get someone to do something, even if it's a minor thing, like going to a briefing to learn more about an issue, or signing on to a very general letter about the issue, you know, you're forming a relationship based on that. You know, you have a success together You have something that you've asked them to do and they've done it, and you can continue to build the relationship on that. And so you don't want to squander that opportunity, say by going into the office of someone who sort of opposes the war in Afghanistan or is just starting to come around and say, I want you to co-sponsor this bill to pull all the troops out tomorrow. That's not likely to get you very far. So, and it's not that you can't go in there and tell them that that's what you think ultimately should be done, but you want to have an ask for them that's suited to what they're likely to do. Again, think about what's going to have the most impact as well. So, if this person sits on a committee, that is relevant to your issues, then it's likely that asking them to do something related to that could have a lot more impact, or that their actions are going to be more noticed by the public or other members of Congress because of their role, or if they're in a leadership position in Congress or within their party. You can think about what's likely to get the most attention and ask for that. What are they capable of doing? And again, this is sort of obvious, but you want to make sure that you know where things are in a process. So obviously you're not going to ask someone to co-sponsor a bill that's in the Senate if they're a representative, but also you want to think about, if you want to say cut the nuclear weapons budget, cut money for this specific program, but this person's not on the committee that does that, then you have to think about what is the ask that's relevant to them, because they're not going to be involved at that level, at that micro level of cutting really specific things from the budget. So you might be asking them to do something they don't really have the ability to do. And a really important thing is to prioritize. And this is something that I know personally we at Peace Action West have been focusing on. It's very easy, especially when you work on more than one issue, to go into a meeting with a laundry list of asks. There are all these different bills out there, or all these different things that we could do, and you can go in there and just lay it all out for them. But then it's a lot harder to get them to do something. It's going to get lost in the shuffle if you're listing off, 8 different things that this person could do. That's why you want to narrow it down, and you really want to tailor it to the person that you're talking to. And and really focus on that being your ask, so that you have that one thing that you can talk to them about, you can follow up on, and you can make sure that, again, it's something that's appropriate to them. You're not just giving them a menu of options. And a lot of times that's another part of your materials, you can have the ask part in writing as well. And with information, say if it's a bill, on the text of the bill, or where to find the text of the bill, and who to contact to co-sponsor, stuff that's going to make it really easy for them to do what you're asking them to do. And in terms of the ask, you're probably not going to get an answer in the meeting, and that's okay. Because, again, if you're talking to a staff person, you might not feel comfortable speaking on behalf of his or her boss, in that direct way, saying, oh yeah, again, and it depends on the person. Some people might say, oh, I think he'd probably do that, or that sounds like something she would support. Or you might hear something much more general, like, oh, we just have to, we'll take a look at it and get back to you. Again, sometimes if you are talking to the member of Congress, I have been in meetings where the member's like, oh yeah, add my name to that, and it's that easy. But that's rare. So, don't be frustrated if you don't have a clear understanding of what the person's going to do. It really is an ongoing process, and it's all about follow-up. So for an example for this, I have another little exercise here. And this is an example of, say you're meeting with Senator Clay Davis. Some of you may recognize him as well. So this is what we know about this senator. So he thinks we should have a credible nuclear deterrent, but we can reduce the size of our arsenal. He's on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he's more of a workhorse than a show horse. He's not really out in the media much, which if you know the character that this is based on, that's not really accurate. But so there's a poll there in terms of which of these things would you ask Senator Davis to do in a meeting with him. So you want to take a second and answer that, and also if you have questions about any of this stuff on the ask, go ahead and raise your hand or send the question, because we'll pause for questions after that.
And just as a quick reminder, you can either chat your question or you can raise your hand, and then I'll unmute you.
Okay, looks like about half of you have voted, so I'm going to give it another little bit here. And again, if anyone has a question in the meantime, feel free to ask it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this up since the majority of you have voted and share the results there with you. So we've got a pretty good mix there, 42 for the first one, 42 for the second, and 17 for the last. So here's what I'll say about these different options, or my thinking and putting them out there. And none of these is a bad ask, I would say, in terms of that they're all very concrete things, and they're realistic in terms of presumably this sense of the Senate resolution does exist. So they're all reasonable. Now, if this were me, I would pick the middle option, which 42% of you pick. And my reasoning for that, and if you all have questions or comments about that, we can get at that in the question section, is the first thing we know about him is that he thinks we need a nuclear deterrent, but we can reduce the size of our arsenal. So he's not with us yet on getting rid of nuclear weapons, but there's room to work there. So we still need to work to get him to the point where he's ready to say we should abolish nuclear weapons. So asking him to co-sponsor a sense of the Senate resolution saying we should abolish nuclear weapons, probably not likely that he's going to do that. And again, we could tell him that's our position and that's where we want him to be eventually, but that probably wouldn't be the thing I would ask him to do. I would ask him about a committee hearing, which 42% of you picked, because number one, we know he's on the committee that deals with these issues. So, that's an opportunity that most members of Congress do not have to weigh in on this issue. And, it's a way that he can draw attention to the spending on nuclear weapons. That gets on the record, that gets on C-SPAN. It's something that can reverberate and then we can get out there. And not too many of you picked writing an op-ed, again, which I think it could be a good ask, and it fits with his position in terms of supporting reducing our arsenal. But why I probably wouldn't prioritize it is that he's not out. He's the kind of person who doesn't get out in the media much. And that's something, if you don't know, you can find out in a meeting by talking to someone. And I've had that kind of experience with people where I said, what about something like this person, doing a TV interview or putting out a statement and, been told, oh, well, he's not really a statement kind of person, or he doesn't really give a floor speech unless, there's something really specific going on. So that's information you can find out for the future in your meeting. But that is my thinking. And again, none of those is a bad ask. They're concrete. They're fairly reasonable, but in my thinking, the second one would really be the best based on what we know and the most realistic thing that he would do. So does anyone have any questions or comments at this point before we start talking about what you're going to do in the actual meeting?
Thanks, Rebecca. Just waiting to see if anyone has any questions on the material that we just covered. There is still going to be another opportunity for questions, but just any comments or clarifying questions, you can chat it in or raise your hand.
Okay. I can't see, but I'm assuming if we don't have any more, oops, I'll move on.
Sure.
So, going on to what actually happens when you get into the meeting. I put this photo up here. Some of you may recognize a couple of the people in that photo. I know there were some Oregon PSR people on the list at least, so that's me on the far left, and then next to me is Kelly Campbell, who directs the Oregon chapter of PSR, and that's Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon, and a couple of other local folks that came in that meeting with us. That was a meeting we did with him about the war in Afghanistan. And this is another example where we had Kelly from PSR, who could talk about the health effects of nuclear weapons and has supporters all throughout the state. And then we had Zahir, who is a professor, and he's from Afghanistan. He goes back there once a year to help train teachers over there. And then we had Mark, who's a Lutheran pastor, and Senator Merkley happens to be Lutheran as well. So we had a good meeting with him, and he has since been very active on the Afghanistan issue and pushing to end the war. So what to do when you're in the actual meeting to get the most out of it. First, you want to just call or email ahead to confirm, depending on how far ahead you've scheduled your meeting. Just to want to make sure that nothing has come up. People have pretty crazy schedules, especially if you're meeting with people in DC, things can move around. So it's always good to just call and confirm, make sure that you're still set. You want to show up early. Again, people tend to be in pretty tight schedules, so you want to make sure that everyone's there and assembled on time. Another thing is just dressing professionally. Again, a lot of you have already done lobby meetings. Some of this stuff will be obvious to you, but you want to make sure that people are going to be focused on what you're saying and not what you're wearing. So while it shouldn't really be important, it does tend to be important. So you want to just make sure that you're dressed to the level they are. I think some Hill offices have gotten a little more casual in recent years, where you see occasional person in jeans or something like that. But for the most part, people on the Hill are running around in suits. So it's good to be dressed up to their level as well. You want to start on a positive note. So, thank them for something. And again, it's really great if you can thank them for something really specific that they've done already on an issue that's important to you. So if you go into a meeting and this person, say, has already, voted to ratify the New START Treaty. If you're meeting with a Senate office, and you can say, how much you appreciate that that person did that and, gave a great speech about why the treaty is important. That way, again, you're giving them the positive reinforcement. You're showing that you know about their record and what they've done. Sometimes you might not have anything to thank them for. They, might be somebody you don't agree with on much, or they haven't really taken action on your issues. In that case, just, thank them for taking the time to meet with you. You can introduce everyone just so everyone knows who's who and what groups they're with. And again, that's a way to just make it more personal. You're trying to build some sort of connection, some kind of common ground with the person. And I think a really key piece, again, and it really depends, is respecting the staff person, if that's who you're meeting with, because that person is really the gatekeeper, and that person is going to be really important to your future relationship and influencing this person. And, as you can imagine, every member of Congress isn't going to be an expert on every single issue that comes before Congress. There's a ton of staff, and all of it is getting filtered up this hierarchy in the office. So, a staffer that works on foreign policy issues would have to work it up the chain, maybe to their legislative director, to their chief of staff, to the member of Congress, and they're going to decide what gets to that person's desk and what doesn't. So if you have a good relationship with that person, then that's going to be your key to really influencing them. And in my experience, again, it really varies. If you can meet with a member of Congress, obviously that's great and you want to do that. But sometimes I think the meetings with staff can be even more productive than the meetings with members of Congress, because it's a little bit harder to drive the conversation with a member of Congress, right? They're going to sort of talk about what they're going to talk about. I spent some time in a meeting with a member of Congress who's going on about the first time she met Al Gore, and he was sitting there writing about global warming on a napkin at a bar or something, which was not particularly relevant to our conversation, but we're not about to tell a member of Congress to stop talking about it. But also you can obviously get just their unvarnished opinion if it's a member of Congress. I talked to a member of Congress about Iran who made a point and said, well, I have no credibility. I thought there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So sometimes you get these little random gems that you won't hear from a staffer. But for most of the real day-to-day work that you're going to do, if you're building an ongoing relationship, is with a staffer. So you want to be really respectful of them and their role in the office, because that can really make or break your relationship in getting your issue in front of the member. You want to listen carefully, of course. You want to, because again, all the information that you're getting in this meeting can be really helpful in making future decisions about how you're going to approach this person. Ask questions. We talked a lot about that already. If there's some person says something and you're not sure what they mean, or if you have other questions about where the member is or what might happen, ask those questions. Take really good notes. And, if they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know. Again, seems pretty obvious, but there can be that sort of pressure. We're like in a meeting and you don't want to seem like you don't know what you're talking about. But just say, I don't know, but I can find out for you and send you the information later. That way you can make sure that you're getting them the right information. But you want to turn around on them asking certain questions. What's going on in Congress? What's the timing on things? Why they have a certain position. People will tell you a lot about, oh, this is why I think we still need to have nuclear weapons or whatever it is. Also, it can be helpful, again, some people are more forthright than others. But sometimes they'll tell you who they listen to. Like they might say, oh, I just listened to Representative Smith on this because he's the ranking member on the committee, so whatever he says, that's what I go with. Or I talked to this group or that group. One example of this, I was doing a meeting with a staffer whose boss is on the Energy and Water Committee, which deals with nuclear weapons. And he was very blunt about what was happening behind the scenes and told us about how John Kyle called his boss every day to make sure he didn't cut the nuclear weapons budget. And so it can give you some ideas of, who's influencing them, so that if, say, this representative changes his mind about the issue, then it could impact your representative. So, and some of that stuff you get into a little bit more when you're more comfortable with lobbying. It's a little more advanced, but it's good stuff to think about. And again, since a lot of you have a lot of experience doing lobbying already, that's good stuff to think about in terms of sort of upping your game in the lobby meetings. Another thing is always keep it polite. And I think this is really important, in that you're building a relationship with this person. This person is a human being. He or she doesn't like getting yelled at any more than you like getting yelled at. So it's not really the time to go in there and pound your fists, which some people want to do. I've talked to go into a meeting. And that doesn't mean you can't disagree. It doesn't mean you can't be forthright about being unhappy about something that the person has done. But you want to convey that in a polite and respectful way, and that's going to get you a lot farther, than going in there with sort of negative attitude. And thinking about, I think that the harsher messaging is often good for sort of the inside-outside kind of strategy, and sometimes getting the harsher messaging on the outside can help on the inside too. And another example of that I've seen, with Nancy Pelosi, we're trying to influence her. I remember going to a meeting with her office, and I had to step over a Code Pink protester who was lying on the floor in the entryway of her office to get in and talk to someone. But then when I was talking to her staffer, they really wanted to do something on our issues because they were getting both the pressure on the outside and inside. So, having a stronger message in your grassroots strategy, I think is great. I think in the meeting, again, you're going to benefit from having an ongoing relationship with this person. So you want to be clear about what you want, be clear about your disagreements, but keep it polite. And then lastly, of course, going back to what we already said, you want to make sure that you are asking directly for what you want. You don't want to just say your arguments and kind of leave it at that. You want to make sure that you're saying, we would really like Representative Smith to co-sponsor the SANE Act. Do you think he'll do that? And again, you won't necessarily get an answer, but you've made it very clear that you have a specific action that you're expecting, and it gives you something to follow up on. Any questions about what happens in the meeting, either anything I covered or anything I didn't cover, before we get into the last section on what to do after your meeting?
We have one question, actually two questions, one from Tammy. I'm just going to unmute Tammy. Tammy, go ahead. Okay. We have another question from John C. Tate, and the question is, how does a person become a lobbyist for their city?
I'm not sure that I understand the question.
I think it might be sort of, who do you need to coordinate with? Are there like different local groups that you should contact before you meet with your local elected official, or is it just okay to sort of go on your own if you're not tied to a national group?
It's definitely something that you can do on your own. It's not something that a lot of people do, but I had the experience of going to meet with a local member of Congress and sitting in the waiting room talking to someone who was just a constituent, and he's like, yeah, I just like to come and talk to him and tell him, what's going on. So it's their job is to serve constituents. So if you know how to go about asking for a meeting, which again, if people have questions about that, we can talk about that. Then, and again, it'll depend on the office, how liberal they are with granting meetings with people. But, if you even just wanted to do it by yourself or put together your own group of friends or people that you can definitely do that. But it often helps to work with people who are with an organization or have experience doing it as well.
We have a question from Tammy. Is it okay to coordinate with grassroots activists to have them doing perhaps direct actions in coordination with your meeting?
Yeah, I think that can be a really good strategy, and we've definitely employed it in the past. For instance, we've done, call-in days where we say we're going to be in DC on this day in the offices, and we want you to all call up and say that this issue is important to you. Because I think that can be really helpful, because it does help to show that you have a grassroots presence, that it's not just a handful of people in your meeting who have something to say. I think that you want to be careful about, how you go about that, and how coordinated you are. I think it could be a little bit difficult if you're, protesting or, in a really negative way in front of the office and trying to go in and have a meeting. I think you want to sort of weigh out how the different things are going to be perceived. But in terms of having people contacting the office around the same time that you're meeting, I think that's a great idea.
Great, thanks. I think that might be the questions for now.
Okay. The last thing that's important is keep in touch. It's not over just because you had your meeting. In this picture, that's my representative, Barbara Lee, on the phone. In this case, she's on the phone with people in Iran. That was an initiative that happened a little while ago to help connect people in our two countries. But in terms of next steps, you want to think about what should be the ongoing results of your lobby meeting. So one is just evaluate and determine next steps. So, when you're together with your group, take a few minutes to say, okay, what do we think went well? Were there any interesting pieces of information that you got that you didn't know before that you should make a note of? What arguments really resonated? There are times where I'll be in a meeting and somebody will make a certain point and you see the person suddenly pick up their pen and write something down. Like, those are good things to notice in your meetings. Okay, that person thought that was useful enough to write down, and they might want to report that back later. And you want to think about what kind of follow-up is needed. Maybe they said something in the meeting and you think, oh, actually, when she said that, it made me think she should really read this article, and I'll make sure to send that to him. So even if it didn't come up in the course of the meeting, you might think, oh, this would be a good way to follow up, and think about, what are the next steps to get what you want. So for instance, you might say, okay, we asked her to co-sponsor this bill, seemed possible she might do it, they seemed somewhat receptive, and we think that if they got a bunch of letters in the next couple of weeks, that would probably help. So one of your next steps might be, we're going to do a letter writing party, or we're going to ask all our constituents to call up and ask for that, and that way it's part of that ongoing cycle. So it's not just that they have the meeting, but that they're actually hearing from constituents again, showing that you have a broader presence. So that can be one good next step if you're really targeting someone and really want them to take that action. Make sure you send a thank you note. And a lot of congressional staffers are very email focused at this point, so I generally do that by email, though you can send a handwritten note as well. But again, that's one of the best ways to communicate with a lot of people. They're always out there on their Blackberries and paying a lot of attention to email 24 hours a day. Also, if you promise any information, send it right away. So again, if there was a question that you didn't know how to answer, then you want to make sure that you figure out what the answer is and send that information, or if it was some article or something about the bill, you want to make sure that you get that to the person right away. It just shows that you're on top of it, that you're responsive to their request, because, one of the things that I think is really important to, over the long term, being a strong lobbyist, is that they see you as a resource as well. And I'll get emails from people, from staffers, being like, oh, what does your organization think about this bill? We're thinking about co-sponsoring it. What do you think? Or do you know how much we spend on missile defense, because we might want to introduce an amendment. We want to know the answer to that. So if you're on top of getting them information, then you might be someone that they come to when they need help, and that's a really good way to have a good relationship with them and establish yourself as a good resource. I think then you want to follow up with a phone call or an email to check a few weeks after your meeting, if you haven't seen some sort of response from what you asked for. So if you ask someone to co-sponsor a bill, it's been a few weeks and they haven't done it yet, then, that could be a time to call up and say, oh, and again, you don't want to be, aggressive about it in terms of, why haven't you done this yet or anything like that, but it's you can do it in a sort of laid back way of, oh, I just wanted to know if you had a chance to take a look at that bill, do you have any questions about it, and that way hopefully they can tell you, oh, she's been out of town, I haven't had a chance to show it to her yet, or we have concerns about this or that piece of it that we're looking into, and it shows that you're persistent, right? That you care about it, and that you're not just going to leave it to them to figure out whether they're going to do it or not. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle. One example, there was a member of Congress that we work with who co-sponsored a bill that we didn't particularly like, and we're kind of surprised to see that he had done that. And so I called up the staffer and I asked them why they did that. And he basically said, well, this group just would not give up. They just kept calling us, and we were hoping that they wouldn't notice that we hadn't done it, but they just would not give up. They just kept calling, and it just got to the point where it was not worth the hassle to upset them. Now that was a particular group that is very influential, and are not all at that level, but I think it does go to show that the persistence piece of it, polite persistence, is really important. That again, you have to make the case to them that this is something people in the district really want them to do, and that you want to have that follow through. And then if hopefully they do follow through, then you want to make sure that you acknowledge that as well, which you can do with an email to the staffer or something like that. If there's any public way to acknowledge it, an email to your members, or if you have a blog on your blog or anything like that, I think they love that too, because they like to see their names out there in the community for doing something positive. But even if it is just shooting an email saying, hey, we really appreciate that your boss did this thing we asked for. Again, that shows that that they will be rewarded for that, that there is positive reinforcement. And you can also have your grassroots get in touch and say thank you as well. And that's really important to cementing that relationship because, again, you're going to get the most out of it if it's an ongoing thing. You know, the people that I've seen the most out of my relationships with them are the people that I am in regular contact with, you know, meet with regularly and are keeping on top of what they're doing. And, you know, that way when you ask them for something, they know your name, they know your face, and they're much more likely to respond. So any last questions about any aspect of the lobbying process?
We have a question from Tammy. I'm just going to unmute you, Tammy. Let's see if it works this time. Tammy, can you unmute yourself? Or if that's not working, you can chat it in the window and then I will relay the question. We have a question from Brenda. How do you get a meeting?
Okay. So if you want to get a meeting, generally speaking, it's a good idea, I think, to have your team put together ahead of time and know who you want to come to the meeting as much as you can beforehand, and then figure out who you want to ask for a meeting with. If you're going to ask for a meeting with the member of Congress, then you want to find out who their scheduler is, which you can find out by just calling the office and asking for the email address. Usually that's how they'll want to do it, of the scheduler. And then you just send that person an email saying, you know, we would like to meet with Representative so-and-so and talk about these issues, and this is who's going to be in the meeting. They'll want to know. And I think, again, if you get a good group, then having their names in the email will get their attention and make them more likely to set up the meeting. And I think it's generally good. You want to give them at least a few weeks of a heads up, and if you can give them a time range, especially for a meeting with a member, that helps a lot. So if you know that they're in recess for a week, and they're going to be in the district and say, we'd like to meet sometime during this week. And then, again, you'll probably have to follow up. So send the email, and then if you haven't heard anything in a little while, then give them a call or send another email to follow up. You know, if you want to meet with a staffer, then usually you can, you can ask. I'm sure that that David and Ashish can help with this too, find out who the person is, or you can just call the DC office and say, you know, who's the person who handles this issue, and get that person's email address, and then just ask that person directly for a meeting. Anything else?
Any other questions? Oh, we do have one. Do you have a sense of how often one should be in contact with an office? Is it only when there's moments of opportunity, or should you periodically check in on the issue that you're advocating for?
I think it can be, I think you can be proactive about it, and that it can be a little bit more than just like right when a vote's coming up or something like that. You know, I try to keep in more regular contact with people, but you want to find a balance in that. You don't want to just be, obviously they get tons of emails, you know, they get a lot of stuff coming at them, so you don't want to be wasting their time, right? So you don't want to be sending them a message saying, hey, just want to see what's up. You know, so I think it is a matter of finding things, and again, finding opportunities where you can be helpful. You know, so sometimes I think it's okay if, for instance, you just see something related to an issue and you know it's really interesting to them. You know, like, oh, there's this article, like I was working with an office on a bill around arms sales and then saw this report on arms sales and was like, oh, I'll send this to the staffer and just say this might be helpful to you. So I think you just want to find a balance and make sure that, you know, when you're contacting them, it's with something useful. But I don't think you have to reserve it just for, you know, when there's some really big thing coming up. I think that having more regular communication can help in just solidifying your relationship.
Thanks. We have one more question. Trina Paulus.
Hi, I work with a 501c3, and I understand you work mostly with 501c4s. Could you explain what you're allowed to do as a 501c4 and why we might consider that we should become one as well as a 501c3 for the sake of doing more lobbying.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I think David might get a little more into this in the end, and I will say, you know, I'm not an expert on this, so I'd recommend talking to the Alliance for Justice, which David is going to mention, that is really good at answering detailed questions. And I do most of my work as a 501c4. And, you know, the advantage of that is it's very easy. You can do as much lobbying as you want to. So there are certainly advantages to that. The main disadvantage is that people's contributions to a C4 are not tax deductible. So a lot of people prefer to give to 501c3s. But you do have quite a bit of leeway as a C3 in terms of a certain percentage of time that you can lobby and you can focus on direct pieces of legislation. So I'll let David just touch on that a little bit more at the end. But I would recommend, you know, talking to Alliance for Justice about that as well. Anything else before I just wrap up? So really quickly, again, just to review the 3 things that you want to think about with your meeting are being prepared. Think about maximizing your meeting, knowing exactly what you want to get out of it and what you're going to ask and what points you're going to get across. And keeping in touch so that you're always, it's an ongoing process. Hopefully you're meeting with people multiple times over the months and years, and in between you can talk to them on the phone, you can email them. You know, again, in line with the question that came in, you're not overloading them, but finding a good way to just stay in their inbox and on their mind so that relationship continues. And I'll just leave you with this quote that comes from that Congressional Management Foundation survey. And again, this goes back to how influential you all have the potential to be on this call, because the people like you who will come to a lobby meeting are far more likely to be the people who are going to, you know, go to political events, who are going to be in media, who are going to be involved in an election. And the members of Congress know that. They know that, as it says here, you have disproportionate political influence, and that makes you really powerful in a way that a lot of people aren't necessarily, because you have those skills. So again, you are not normal, but you are influential, and that's really important in terms of making political change. So while David wraps up, or before he wraps up, I'll just leave my contact information up there. So obviously David and Ashish are great resources for all of you, especially those of you I know that are part of PSR. But I'm also happy to be a resource if you are planning a meeting and have questions or anything about the issues. You know, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. We really appreciate all of this great information. And I appreciate all of you sticking with us through this presentation. A lot of information to take in. I just do want to try to hit on a couple more things. When we planned this webinar out, we knew that exactly what Rebecca has shared with all of you is what we wanted to focus on. And now we thought, having heard from some of you, that there were some questions about these 501c3, C4 issues. I think all of you know those are IRS tax status things. PSR is a 501c3, and work within that context. I'll say clearly, while we're focused tonight on lobbying, the one thing you cannot do as a C3 is ever endorse candidates. It's a firm line. It's something you should be very careful about. And you can and you should lobby. Both C3s and C4s can lobby. I want to be very clear that I'm not a lawyer, can't give legal advice, and recommend the Alliance for Justice as a great source for all of you. They have initiative on bolder advocacy, helping people learn about the many possibilities of what you can and cannot do. This is something that from their site, you can go there and find much more detailed information about it. And they have this wonderful service where they will speak to you, give you free legal advice on the phone or email. You can contact the Alliance for Justice, and they will take your very specific questions and hear out those concerns. So the amount of lobbying that you can do does depend on your tax status, but even as a C3, you can and should lobby. It's one of the ways that we take our voice and make it heard in Washington, D.C., so that we can bring about the changes we desire. And I guess I'll throw in that we do this work for many reasons, because we have commitments to making the world a better place, a safer future, a more peaceful future, environmental sanity, and also because of the wonderful people we meet. And certainly have enjoyed working closely with Ashish and with Rebecca on this. And that last question came from someone who I've known for 40 years through her work, but just met last couple nights as she said she was going to attend this webinar. If you haven't yet done so, I recommend reading Hope for the Flowers, Trina's book. It's coming up on its 40th anniversary, a real touch. Coretta Scott King said wonderful things about it. You'll enjoy it. It's a kid's book that meant a lot to me as a child, and I'm appreciative that I got to meet her through doing this webinar. So that's a bit from Alliance for Justice. The C3, C4 issues are very important. You should take care with them, but please make sure you lobby. You can and you must if you want to achieve your goals. And for us, follow-up is always key. This is an important training where you heard a lot of information, but what we hope will come out of it is that you, members of PSR, our chapter network, and all the many organizations who joined us will consider doing these lobby visits. Some of you already have, and it's practicing your skills, honing what you already know by hearing Rebecca. But we also want to make sure that you take this important information you've learned tonight and turn it into effective action. So we would like you to contact us if you want to participate in a meeting. We might try to hook you up if we know other people in your area, help get things moving. But we will also be contacting you, because this is our key goal. Training, this information is very important, but turning that information into action so we can help fulfill our mission and the mission of the many organizations that have joined this call is the key. So thanks again to Rebecca, to Ashish. Thanks to all of you for joining. I hope you have a good night.